While teachers' unions and school boards across the country have been focused on mask mandates and remote learning for a big chunk of the last year, shocking new study reveals just how bad things have really gotten for your kids. The report shows that student test scores across the country have fallen for the first time in the nation's history. 13-year-olds are less proficient in math and reading than they were almost a decade ago. That's according to data collected just before the start of the pandemic. Jesse, you've got school-age kiddos. This was before the pandemic. Things were getting bad. How much worse has it been for your kids over the last year and a half?
Well, they're okay because they're in Catholic schools and the Catholics don't play. They were in person.
That's true.
Learning and reading, so we're grateful for that. But in slavery, the ruling class would not allow Black Americans to read. They didn't want them to have an education. Why? Because knowledge is power. And if someone doesn't have that knowledge and power, it's easier to dominate you. And that thinking is still prevalent today. The ruling class in this country and all over the world, they don't want this generation that educated. They want them educated enough so they can do menial jobs and kind of entry-level management, but they don't want them intelligent. So they start asking questions like, where are all the hundreds of billions of dollars that are going into these public school systems that keep failing? Why don't they teach economics in school? Why do they keep failing students and then graduating them to the next class? And you wonder why people can't do math, and then you realize that they're teaching you that math is racist. So there are powerful people in this country that don't care about education. They want indoctrination. They want people mad at the other race, and they want them kind of divided so they're distracted and dumb, so they're not seeing what the ruling class is doing, raiding the treasury, opening the borders, and sending all the jobs to China.
Jessica, that feels very Brave New World. It's very Aldous Huxley from Jesse.
I always try to think before the show, like, what will Jesse say? And I did not.
Bracelet doesn't take too long.
Did you have down Aldous Huxley?
I did not.
Brave New World.
No, definitely not. And obviously, I vehemently disagree with the comparison to what slave owners were doing in trying to keep people enslaved and working on plantations versus what educators and, quote, ruling class folks are doing.
And think about it, though, for a second, because you're not allowing people to do charter schools. And now they're saying you don't want parents to have a stake in their child's education. If you interrupt that little power structure that we have set up right now, that unleashes the beast.
You know, we've been talking about how that may be one of the big things in this Virginia governor's race.
It is, absolutely. And there was the comment that Terry McAuliffe made during the debate about this. It's certainly an important issue. We have a ton of charter schools in this country, and Democrats believe that we also need to improve the public schools so that everyone can have an opportunity to have a great education. And there are a lot of Democrats who are also pro-charter school. I would remind you, if you even look at Michelle Rhee's work, obviously that's a great example of that. There are definitely failings of the public school system. The impact of not only Zoom school, but the mental health strain of the last 18 months on young people, I'm sure is going to continue to factor into these testing results. And living here, I've been following closely, obviously, what Eric Adams, who will be our mayor come election day here in New York City, has been saying. And Mayor de Blasio had talked about eliminating our gifted and talented programs. And Eric Adams came out and said, A, I don't think you can do that, and B, I would never do that. And I think that keeping the standards makes such a difference, especially in helping along the kids who are succeeding in these systems, and also identifying the kids who may need a little bit of extra help. And I hope that, obviously, those programs stay and that we see more of that.
Yeah, and Katie, she mentioned, Jessica talks about the mental health issues, and I was reading today about this one CEO of a children's hospital in Connecticut said that they are so overwhelmed with beds for children who need inpatient psychiatric care because of what they've been through the last year and a half, and that's certainly not going to reflect well educationally either.
I think for a lot of parents and logically thinking people, this is especially infuriating because if you look at the consequences and all of the data, whether it's mental health or test scores, this was obvious in summer of 2020. You had Senator Rand Paul have an exchange with Dr. Fauci in May of 2020 saying, hey, we really need schools to be open in the fall because there will be consequences, especially for minority students, if we don't do that, whether it's mental health or their education falling behind, and they're never going to be able to make it up. When you look at these numbers, it's like, how are these kids ever going to be able to get that time back? How are they ever going to catch up, especially when you have unions who repeatedly over the past year, whenever there was a compromise made for them to get back to the classroom, they threw up another roadblock. We want more money. We want more vaccines. We want this. We want that. And then parents who dared to say, well, we would really like our schools to be open, and we think some of these COVID restrictions are pretty ridiculous considering that you guys were vaccinated and put in front of the line. And then they were doxxed. And then they were shut out of school board meetings. And then when parents found out what they were actually teaching their children because of the Zoom learning, they were then called racist and bigoted. And so, one silver lining of this may be that there is a new school choice revolution that is happening. You had a school board member today in Loudoun County resign as a result of parental involvement. And so, again, just generally, you can apply this standard of, did we see this coming a year ago? We did. And because everybody listened to Anthony Fauci, this is the consequence that was warned about.
Well, and a lot of other countries have handled this differently, the masking the kids in school, out of school. But what we found out here is that the kids who were already trailing behind are the ones who have slipped even further because of this.
Right. I think there's got to be a creative way to attack the inner city schools because money's pouring in, but it's not being used in an effective way. It's not like they're being starved out. I will say, for what I judged, my son went to private school, my two daughters went to public school. One thing was consistent, ton of homework. I thought it was much more homework. They worked, and everybody I talked to, I can't believe how much homework these kids have. I don't think they had it easy, and I have to see where these targeted scores are and why they're not producing results. But I think you have, what you're saying is correct too, is that we're putting a lot of money into these schools, and it's not necessarily Democrat or Republican, Jessica, that talks about charter schools. Let's just create competition.
Yeah.
Give an opportunity for these charter schools to compete with the public schools. The public schools will get better. The charter schools will make the public schools better if a competition happens. And if Virginia, it changes leaders, changes parties, and if we could find a way to see if you could take your money, your public school money, and you put it towards the private school, man, game on in terms of effectiveness.
Just real quickly
that is called standings. That is
well,
America.
Terry
free
McAuliffe
market.
just said, to your point of the charter schools getting public money from parents, that he would not allow that as governor. He's a Democrat.
And there is a case coming at the Supreme Court in a couple of months that is going to be about money moving with kids and whether it can be used in private schools. So
Think
watch
about
that
that
one as well.
The result will be better schools all around.